every 4 years.
More than 5 billion people stop what they're doing. Entire countries come to a standstill. Cities explode with celebration. Families gather around television screens, and 90 minutes of football become more important than politics, business, or even war. The FIFA World Cup isn't just a sporting event. It's the largest emotional gathering humanity has ever created. But here's the question almost nobody asks.
Who imagined all of this?
Who was the one man who looked at a divided world and believed football could unite it? And why did almost everyone tell him it was impossible? Because without that man, there would be no World Cup.
No Messi lifting the trophy.
No Maradona.
No Pele.
No Ronaldo. No billion-dollar football industry, only a forgotten dream that somehow changed the entire planet. And the story behind that dream is far stranger than you think. Section 1. A global obsession and the insane idea. Today, the FIFA World Cup generates billions of dollars, attracts billions of viewers, and turns ordinary footballers into global legends. But nearly 100 years ago, the idea sounded completely insane. There were no television broadcasts. International travel took weeks. Europe was still recovering from one of history's deadliest wars. Countries barely trusted each other. Many football associations refused to participate. Some even laughed at the proposal. Yet one quiet Frenchman refused to give up. He wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a famous athlete. He wasn't a politician. But he believed football could accomplish something governments never could: bring the world together. What he didn't know was that this dream would force him into battles against powerful officials, financial disasters, political resistance, and even the possibility that the very first World Cup would never happen. But that's not even the most unbelievable part. Because the real reason he fought so hard wasn't fame. It was something deeply personal. And once you discover why, you'll never look at the World Cup the same way again.
Section 2. Before the World Cup, a fragmented world. Imagine living in a world where the greatest football tournament simply didn't exist. No opening ceremony, no golden trophy, no iconic finals, no unforgettable moments passed from one generation to the next. In the early 1900s, football was already becoming popular across Europe and South America. Crowds packed stadiums, local rivalries grew more intense every year. But internationally, football was fragmented.
The only major global competition available was the Olympic Games, and even that came with strict amateur limits. Many of the world's best footballers simply couldn't compete. Professional football, the true future of the sport, had no global stage. To many officials, that wasn't a problem. Football was already growing. Why risk changing everything? But one man saw something everyone else missed.
He believed football wasn't just another sport. It was a universal language, one capable of crossing borders, religions, cultures, and even enemies. His name was Jules Rimet, a soft-spoken Frenchman whose obsession to unite the world was born from the trauma of war. At first glance, he looked ordinary, reserved, far from the charismatic leaders history usually celebrates. But behind that calm personality was an absolute obsession. An obsession born not from football, but from war. Because years earlier, Jules Rimet had witnessed something that permanently changed the way he saw humanity. And this single experience would become the foundation of the greatest sporting event ever created. But there was one problem. The world wasn't ready for his dream, not even FIFA itself, and what happened next nearly destroyed everything before it even began.
Section 3. The dream that almost died and the post-war vision. For Jules Rimet, football was never just about scoring goals. He believed it could achieve something that politicians had repeatedly failed to accomplish. To understand why, you have to rewind to the aftermath of the First World War. Europe had been left emotionally and economically devastated. Millions of lives had been lost, entire communities had been shattered, and distrust between nations ran deeper than ever before. Most leaders believed peace would come through diplomacy. Rimet believed something different. He believed peace could begin with competition, not on the battlefield, but on a football pitch. It sounded almost naive. How could 90 minutes of football accomplish what years of negotiations couldn't? Most people dismissed the idea immediately. But Rimet wasn't interested in proving them wrong with words. He wanted to prove it with history.
In 1921, Jules Rimet becomes FIFA president. Many assumed the organization would continue doing what it had always done, organizing international football while leaving the Olympic Games to serve as the sport's biggest stage. But Rimet had a completely different vision. He wanted an independent world championship.
One tournament.
The best players.
The best nations.
One trophy, one champion. Today, that idea feels obvious. Back then, it sounded almost impossible. And this is where things get interesting. The biggest obstacle wasn't money, it wasn't travel, it wasn't logistics, it was fear. Many football associations were terrified of failure. What if nobody showed up? What if the tournament embarrassed FIFA? What if the financial losses bankrupted the organization? Some officials believed the Olympics were already enough. Others argued that professional football would destroy the spirit of international competition. Every meeting became another battle. Every proposal faced another rejection. Every step forward seemed to create two new obstacles. Yet Rimet refused to abandon the dream, because he understood something powerful about human psychology. People rarely support an idea before it succeeds. They support it after someone else proves it can work. But before he could prove anything, he had to convince the entire football world to take an enormous risk. And that risk would become even bigger than anyone imagined.
Section 4. The world said no, a nightmare reality. In 1928, after years of persuasion, debates, and political negotiations, the tournament is officially approved. The World Cup was finally becoming a reality. It should have been the happiest moment of Jules Rimet's life. Instead, it marked the beginning of his greatest nightmare. Because approving a tournament on paper was very different from actually making it happen.
The first question seemed simple. Where should the tournament be held? Several European nations showed interest, but there was one unexpected country willing to do something extraordinary.
Uruguay offers to host and fund the event. At the time, Uruguay wasn't considered a football superpower by today's standards. It was a relatively small South American nation, but it had recently won Olympic football gold and was preparing to celebrate the centenary of its independence. Its government made FIFA an offer almost impossible to ignore. They would build a massive stadium. They would pay many of the costs. They would welcome the world. On paper, it looked like the perfect choice. In reality, it created another crisis. Traveling from Europe to South America wasn't a short flight. There were no commercial airlines crossing the Atlantic in hours. It required weeks of transatlantic ship travel. Players would have to leave their jobs, clubs would lose their stars, national associations questioned whether the journey was worth it. Then, the global economic collapse strikes. The Great Depression wipes out budgets almost overnight. Football suddenly became the last thing governments wanted to finance. One after another, European teams withdraw en masse. Some simply couldn't afford the journey, others refused to travel at all. As the opening ceremony approached, the nightmare became impossible to ignore.
What if almost nobody came? Imagine organizing the first World Cup in history, only for half the invited nations to stay home. Newspapers questioned the tournament. Critics mocked FIFA's ambition. Some insiders quietly predicted the event would become an unforgettable failure. Everything Jules Rimet had worked toward for years seemed ready to collapse. But nobody expected what happened next. Because in the middle of chaos, a handful of nations made a decision that would change football forever. And that decision transformed a fragile experiment
Into the beginning of a global obsession.